Is Mark Rosekind, former administrator of NHTSA in USA, good friend since many years around Vision Zero, and who is now representing the private sector. And it would be very interesting to hear about what your thoughts are about future technologies and what today's technology have achieved. Mark, please.
Anders, we've talked about this, and I think it's right on target, which is this is a complicated environment. And as administrator, we put out the first federal automated vehicles policy, and everybody was pushing, we need regulations, but we are in a moment of innovation. And right now we have to be very cautious on how much we constrain that innovation, but it can't be done, being from Silicon Valley, in a Wild West kind of way. So it's got to be done safely. And I think what you've already heard, which is really critical, is technology is just a tool. And it's a very different problem to talk about democratizing that safety tool for the whole world. So we've got, again, a very challenging environment. I think from a national policy level, we've already heard, how do you find ways to stimulate the innovation, to make sure those tools actually exist to help us? So my philosophy, created by many of the people in this room, is if we ever want to get to zero, say in 30 years, that means that we're going to have to enhance and expand what we already know works. We're going to have to emphasize and implement even further safe systems. And we need to advance new technology. And so one of the things I sort of warn people is, if the new technology, the tools don't exist, you don't even have the opportunity. And I think once we have those tools, we're going to be able to use them in ways we haven't even thought of. And my example of that is the iPhone. So 11 years ago, if you'd asked somebody, would you actually pay for having a phone in your pocket? And by the way, you'll probably mostly use it for texting, and somebody would say, what's that? Well, that's an app. What's that? And so once you have these tools, they change the world dramatically in a much faster time frame than what we're used to with conventional vehicles, turning the fleet, etc. And so I think, again, part of this challenge is the balance between, and my sense is the path is that we're going to need a lot of innovation, data-driven best practices. So we find ways to democratize that through regulations and other structures that allow us to ensure that democratization of safety for everybody. And the last thing I'll just say is part of the reason I went from NHTSA to the Zooks where I am now was a chance to literally be in the room with these young, brilliant engineers trying to figure out how to do this. And that's what I say, if the tool doesn't exist, who cares? But it's fascinating to be in the room when they say, we can do this. And I'm sitting there saying, well, that's illegal. That's not safe. Can we do that? It's amazing to be there. And one of the things I would really recommend for everybody is to become familiar with what we're talking about. A fully autonomous vehicle is very different than the other kinds of driver assistance systems that already exist. Apps are very different. Selling you a vehicle is very different than the robo-taxi kind of model. So I think that's really critical when you think about how to solve problems with technology is you have to become familiar and understand what those tools are going to be as they come into the future.
Thank you, Mark. We will dig a bit deeper in automation shortly, but I think it's a topic you cannot avoid when you talk about traffic safety these days.